My warm welcome to those of you who are joining us today. This is a hybrid event, so we will have participants joining us virtually as well. My pleasure to welcome you here to the Arab Fund for Economic and Social Development. This is an event jointly organized with our Center for Economics and Finance. It's the IMF Center for Economics and Finance for all the 22 Arab League countries. The event today will discuss the pressing challenges faced by high debt MENA countries and the policy priorities. The goal, of course, is to ensure balancing economic development and debt sustainability objectives. This is always the goal, much easier said than done. We, of course, cherish opportunities like this to engage on a constructive dialogue. I invite you to pose your questions after the presentations, and this is an important topic for the region. My thanks to Chairman Badr Assad and the team from the Arab Fund here hosting the event tonight. They've been a long time partner with us at the center, and this has been a very fruitful cooperation. Let me introduce to you our panel of speakers and discussants. It's a bit too early for that. So on my right, I have the pleasure of having Dr. Adnan Mazareh. Thank you, Adnan, for joining us, who is a non-resident senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics. He has held previously various positions at the IMF. He has written on sovereign debt issues in the region extensively, and he has a PhD in economics from the UCLA. He will be our first speaker of the night. Right on his right, we have Dr. Mahmoud-Sami. Thank you for being with us. Dr. Mahmoud is an economic advisor here at the Arab Fund. Prior to that, he was a full professor of economics at the University of Carthage, and he holds a PhD from University of Paris 1, Panthéon-Sorbonne. And next to him, on my far right, Dr. Chris Papageorgiou, currently an advisor at the IMF in the Asia and Pacific Department. Thank you, Chris, for being with us. He's an associate editor of the IMF Economic Review and the European Economic Review, and he has co-authored the paper exactly on the theme of the event tonight on that, and an IMF paper on market reforms and public debt dynamics that is worth reading. I would recommend reading. On my far left, we have our discussants for the presentations today. Dr. Jiang Yewang, thanks for being with us. He is the honorary head of the Guangzhou Institute of International Finance. He has served as economic counselor and chief economist of the Export-Import Bank of China, and he holds a PhD in economics from Columbia University. He is joined by Dr. Marwan El-Abbasi. Thanks for being with us, Dr. Marwan. He is the former governor of the Central Bank of Tunisia. He has held previously various positions at the World Bank, and he has a PhD in economics also from the University of Paris 1, Panthéon-Sorbonne. And our moderator for tonight, glad to have with us Dr. Mirza Hassan. Thanks for being with us, Mirza. He's now senior advisor here at the Arab Fund for Economic and Social Development. He was previously the dean of the board of executive directors of the World Bank, and he has published extensively on economics and public sector reforms, and of course has dealt with the issue at hand tonight of that extensively. So before we get our discussions underway, let me thank my staff colleagues, the government of Kuwait for hosting us here, the Kuwait Investment Authority for providing steadfast support to the center, and let me thank you for taking the time of this beautiful evening out here in Kuwait to be here with us, and I'm sure your attendance will make this for an engaging and interesting debate, a rich dialogue, and on that issues that are so dear and important for the region. So with that, let me invite Adnan, who will be our first presenter, to come to the podium and make your presentation. Thank you, Adnan.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adnan, for kicking the discussions in style. Very interesting, eye-catching presentation. Let me, in the interest of time, go ahead and ask for Mahmoud-Sami Nabi to come and do his presentation. Thank you, Mahmoud, please.
Thank you very much for inviting me to take part of this panel. Very honored to participate. In the next 15 minutes, I will try to shed light on the importance to have a development perspective for addressing debt overhang in highly indebted Arab countries. Let me first begin by explaining why we are talking about debt overhang in highly indebted Arab countries. As mentioned by Dr. Adnan, Arab countries has been exposed during the last decade to many diverse types of shocks, internal and external shocks. And this has contributed to the slowdown of their economic performance and also increased their needs for external financing. For example, on average, the total external debt to GDP increased from 35.7% in 2015 to almost 60% in 2022. And currently we have 11 highly indebted Arab countries. Some are in default and others have very warning external indebtedness. This can be easily verified by classical or traditional external debt ratios, comparing them to the carrying capacity debt thresholds. So this is a common knowledge, public knowledge, that we have really a problem with these countries. Why we are talking about debt overhang? Because economists know that beyond threshold, external debt will contribute negatively to the economic growth. And this can be easily noted by this U-inverted curve linking external debt to economic growth in Arab countries. We have really a problem with an important engine of economic growth, which is total factor productivity. Total factor productivity, as you can note in the chart in the middle, is contributing negatively to the economic growth during the last decade, which is in red, contributing to an average for 7 among the highly indebted Arab countries by almost 3% in negative contribution. Why total factor productivity is very important? Because it is the main engine of growth in 13 of the successful stories that were identified by the Commission on Growth and Development. And you can easily note the divergence is increasing, the gap is increasing in GDP per capita between these 13 success stories and the highly indebted Arab countries in the chart to the right. So we have an engine of growth which is broken, and we have to repair it. But this is not the end of the story, because also the fiscal space of these governments is reducing, and the service of the external debt service is increasing at the expense of capital expenditure, at the expense of expenditure on education, on health, on basic services, public services. This is an average, but also you can also note that for many countries, for example, the debt service is 7 times what the government is spending on health expenditure. In other countries, 5 times what it's expending on education, etc. So this is really a trap. This is a trap because we want to go out from this vicious circle, but how to make it? This is all coupled by the slow progress of these highly indebted Arab countries in achieving their SDGs goals. Most of them are slowly progressing. This is not difficult to understand, given that the financial gap is of the climate finance gap is of around 95%. They have not essential resources to reduce greenhouse gas emissions or also to make the necessary investment for adaptation to climate risks. So this is another layer of difficulties. Now, how to activate this broken engine of growth? The literature and the best experiences show that we must invest in human capital. I am quoting a recent World Bank blog. Human capital is the primary factor driving the wealth disparity between high and low income nations. Human capital is very important, especially in our region. Why? Because we have a real problem, a very huge problem of youth unemployment. Youth who are not in education, in employment or training are of about 33% of Arab youth, which is around 37 million Arab youth who are in this situation. And you can see the relationship, the strong relationship between a good quality of education as measured by learning adjusted years of schooling and the need rate. So that's why we are saying that we need to go out of this vicious circle through a multidimensional approach, through a holistic development approach, where there is a place for macroeconomic stability through low inflation, fiscal discipline, but this is not the only ingredient. This is only a necessary condition. Best experience show that making growth, sustainable growth, is a difficult task. It needs many ingredients. It needs leadership and governance, efficient function of markets, future orientation, investment in infrastructure, but also in human capital. It needs smart openness to the global economy in order to tap in the opportunities which are available, in addition to the macroeconomic stability. There are countries who succeeded. In addition to the 13 success stories, recently there are many countries like Puerto Rico, like Jamaica, who reduced its public debt from 144% of GDP to 72%. How this country and Puerto Rico did it? They did it through well-tailored, well-designed fiscal discipline anchored in investment in the people, investment in catalyzing growth, but also with addition of the social partner. The social contract that Dr. Adnan talked about is very important. That's why here I represented the space of successfully addressing debt overhang in highly indebted Arab countries. And it is the red space. As it can be noted, this is really reduced space. Why? Because it needs the conjunction of three important factors. First, we need to have governments which are able to conduct various types of reforms, including fiscal consolidation. But also you need a social addition to the reforms. And in order to catalyze these difficult simultaneous successful factors, we need long-term investment. We need long-term investment which will build the confidence of the citizens in the reforms. They will bear with you the burden of the costs short-term, but you have to give them the confidence you are investing in long-term. And this is where we need development financial institutions, we need regional cooperation, because the amount of investment which is needed is beyond the capacity of an individual institution. We need regional cooperation. And the Arab Fund is willing to contribute to this effort. It's a new strategy. It's focusing on 5 priority development areas of the Arab countries: social infrastructure, investing in the quality of education, healthcare, but also water, energy, transport, and logistics, with 5 cutting objectives, among them, and in priority, creating jobs and growth, but also resilience, adaptation to climate risks, in addition to regional integration, leveraging on digital transformation and the leapfrog opportunities it offers to Arab countries, and, of course, reducing inequalities within the countries. Finally, in order for the Arab Fund and other regional institutions to re-engage, to help the defaulting highly in-debt Arab countries, and to increase their financing to those countries who have already maybe unsustainable debt situation, we have also to provide a debt relief, but also to improve regional cooperation. We think that we need an Arab debt relief initiative grounded in comprehensive approach to development, tied to economic reforms, building resilience toward climate change-related risks, and leveraging on digital transformation. We think that this initiative should base it on faster principle, feasibility or progressivity, achievability, solidarity and cooperation, transparency, enforceability of the engagement of the countries, and, of course, re-engagement. Maybe I will finish by this Heron-Fontaine principle, where we have 3 basins, communicating basins. This fountain is from the 1st century. To make the analogy for the Arab Debt Relief Initiative, we need a first basin of Arab Solidarity Fund, the second one, risk pool regional fund, where regional institutions can share the risk of their portfolio, and finally, to cascade fresh water or fresh money injected by high-income countries or through dedicated SDRs to the defaulting country or the country which have really reduced fiscal space. And it is just brainstorming, just we launched this initiative for further discussion. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mahmoud, for bringing the Arab Fund perspective in.
You see the means we are putting on the table is not very important. Let's think seriously about what we can do, just to perhaps to change the way, and it should be not let's say the same way of doing things. Let's try to think. I don't like the word out of the box, but to think seriously. With let's say some other tools we need to put on the table, and to think how this region, and I'm sure there's a win-win when you see the capacity of investment in our region and the funds that the region is holding right now. I think there's a lot of possibilities we can do. Thank you.
Thank you, Marwan. Definitely, Marwan, we need more regional initiatives to address many issues, not only the debt, but other issues which is really the region are suffering from. Let me open, colleagues, the floor. I will take a couple of questions, like 3 to 4 questions from the floor. Then also we have some virtual questions, which Jinan gonna read it to us. But please, when you have your intervention, ask this question is addressed to whom, so I can also guide it to the panelist and the discussant. Please.
Good evening, and thank you very much for your elaboration and very important lectures. When I was listening to your presentation, actually, I was waiting to talk about very important factor that related to reforms, whether political or economics. And the most important challenge is actually is hosting refugees. Refugees in our countries are very important challenge that we are facing, because it tackles not only infrastructure, it talks about also health and education and many other aspects. So refugees, it's not only the responsibility of the hosting countries, it's international collaboration and international responsibilities. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. Can I take? Yes, please.
Thank you. This is Nauman from NBK Economic Research Group. My question is addressed to Mr. Marwan on Egypt. Egypt has been, it has suffered a lot from the topic you just mentioned, and we've seen this over the past couple of months. We didn't restructure, but we managed to do some devaluation over the past couple of years. But we've been doing this type of manual of higher rates devaluation every maybe 4 to 5 years without any serious follow-ups when it comes to these type of reforms, which is understandable to be some of that reforms will hinder other institutions and other political entities, so on and so forth. But the positives of it is clear as well. So my question to Mr. Marwan is, why is there such a resistance to these type of reforms and these type of follow-ups, even though it could save the country from a lot of pain and put it on a more sustainable path moving forward?
Can I have 2 more before I will go to our panelist, please?
Ahmed Al-Kawaz, economist. Actually, my first question goes to Mr. Chris Papageorgiou. He mentioned that the fiscal space is too limited. Actually, in some countries, especially in oil exporting countries, it's huge. But the problem, there is a severe constraint in using it. Not the fiscal space per se is limited. This is one question. Other question, GCC during the first half of 2024 has issued bonds and sukuk equivalent to around $45 billion, more than 2023, despite the very fact that their expected real growth is too much positive for the current year. And the oil price is around 83, 84, encouraging as well. Then, is there any relation or correlation, positive correlation, between more oil production, more oil export, and more debt? Thank you.
One more. Imad?
Thank you very much. My question goes to Mr. Chris as well. You rightly mentioned that certain components of structural reforms have different impact, differentiated impact on debt dynamics, and that's really well taken. But your last message is also well taken, that when political economy considerations and social considerations and social concern, distribution concerns are high, the fiscal cost of reform is too high. And this is the chicken-egg problem in the region, that we cannot start reform because the fiscal cost is too high, the social cost is too high. So the pertinent question in my view, and I think I need your feedback in that, what would be the type of reform that would follow a debt resolution that is amassed in the region that would likely to lead to sustainable growth? Thank you.
Okay, so for the first question about the refugee and the issues or the impact on the neighboring countries, especially economically, and putting pressures on many of the infrastructure. And as I said, that, poor is hosting poor, and without no resources. So how are we going to look at, these refugees as, a public good rather than it will be like a neighboring country issue? Anyone wants to take this question? You didn't address it to a specific discussion, but Mahmoud?
Thank you. Very interesting perspective, indeed. I think refugees is part of the population in many countries, and having or providing services, health, education for this population is important for social stability, and social stability is really has to be considered as regional public good. So I think there is a room for regional cooperation and collaboration between development institutions in providing the minimum basic services for this population.
No, thank you, Mahmoud. But also, if you look at internationally now, who committed into the refugee in the host country has become weaker and weaker, and there is a fatigue in supporting the refugee. And this is where becoming now causing a huge problem in the host country. So that's also internationally where we're going to take the refugee to the level of public good in order to have it like a public, we treat the climate, we need to treat the refugees as that level, in terms of, getting support from the international community. Marwan, Naaman, about the resistance of reform and Egypt.
Perhaps to add something on the refugee, I think Lebanon has been impacted strongly by Syrian refugees for years, and that I think it has impacted largely, what we call this, the utilities in Lebanon. I'm not only talking about education, etc., but water, electricity, etc. And I think, of course, there's governance problems in Lebanon for years, but at the same time it was highly impacted by, the presence of the refugees, and I think the international community did not answer, let's say, as normally it should be. On Egypt, I think it was exactly, I think the second shock. I was very close, to the governor Tariq Amr, because we were talking in the Arab Monetary Fund, and I think he was telling us what is happening. But I think the big shock came with the Ukrainian crisis more than the COVID crisis, to be frank. I think Masr has managed very well the COVID crisis, but after with the shock of the Ukrainian crisis and as Tunisia, I think we were in the same. We were importing oil, and I think it went. I think the price was very high, but at the same time it was also on wheat because we were importing, all the basic needs, etc. And I'm always, trying, to say that, we are in the same region and the same and the what I'm, the World Bank, the IMF, etc. They're part of us. We are part of the IMF, World Bank, etc. I think the response on COVID was, I think, quite good, to be frank. But on the Ukrainian crisis, I think it was a big mess. Because the impact was huge. We were emerging from a huge crisis. I think in Tunisia, I think we've had minus 8%, growth in Tunisia in 2021. And it was a huge impact on our budget. And in Egypt, I think you know very well that, of course, Tunisia, I think we have our monetary policy and exchange policy is quite different, I think, from Egypt. But you see the hot money going out in a very short period of time, and I think that was very important. Now, talking about reform during this period of time, when you have, to manage, the imports or your basic goods, etc. That is, it's not possible, You are the policy maker, and you have to take some tough decision. And I think the tough decision was to feed your population, more than talking about, reforms. And that was, I think the most important thing people should understand. Because that's why, I can tell you, because when you feel that you need, to import, and during this period of COVID, even when you have money, and during the Ukrainian crisis, you have, the financial resources, but you could not get to the international market because of the scarcity of these resources and I think the increase of the prices with not being able, to get, these commodities in the right time. And that's its big issue. We were facing in Tunisia in 2021, and I think it was the same also for Egypt. Then talking about reforms is very complicated. We need to stabilize the macro, and after, to talk about, the main reforms. And I think they took the right reforms right now just to increase, but I hope also that it could not impact, what you call the social stability in the country, because I think the medium, what we call this medium part of the population and what we call this, I think they are highly impacted in countries like Tunisia, Egypt, and some other countries in the region without let's say, without oil, let's say, to be frank, because when you see what is happening in countries like our neighboring countries, Libya and Algeria, they don't have the same problems, to be frank.
Thank you, Marwan. Chris, 2 questions from Ahmed.
Yeah, thanks very much. I'd like to respond very quickly to the immigration question. We see this as a major developing issue. It is a humanitarian issue, but also it's an issue that we've seen more and more the affected countries basically being impacted on the economics. They are fiscal, and we are very mindful with that. We are very closely collaborating with the World Bank and the UN on these issues. We have issued various papers. We cannot provide grants. The World Bank provides grants. What we can do is to provide budget support, and in some countries we have done so. On the question about fiscal space, of course, right? The countries with limited fiscal space are in a huge bind because everybody in the world is looking for sources for growth, and those are difficult to find. Where we find them are for a few advanced economies, and those are very much on the technology sector, and I can speak about this very quickly in the end, right? So very few sectors are responsible for the growth we see around the world. Now, and that is why when you see countries with a lot of large fiscal spaces, they still struggle because growth is hard to find. So is there any relationship between oil prices and debt? No. But we know that there is a relationship mixed between high oil prices and growth, right? There is the theory of curse and the theory of virtue. And a lot of where you are in this range depends on the institutions. You have seen countries where they took advantage of oil exporters, took advantage of this, but we've seen countries that they didn't, and they spent in places that they shouldn't. I have to say that on the last point on the political economy, so as I mentioned, I think our analysis early on was naive in not recognizing that there is a political cost of reform. In other words, the people who are actually implementing this reform, are politicians, has to go through parliaments. These are reforms that has to go through the democratic system. The problem is that this cost is sometimes very high to proceed, and in the work we have done, we offer 2 possible avenues by which this political cost can be mitigated. One is when, it happens far from election time. So you have time to recover from the political cost of reform. People know that reform is good. It's that early on reforms are hard, and the politicians feel it explicitly. The other time is when the times are good. In other words, in good times, you do the difficult reforms. You don't wait until things are not very good to start doing these difficult reforms, because indeed those are harder. So in situations where, of course, we are dealing with crisis, and you need help from international organizations like us, the situation is harder, because there, the first thing you need to achieve is to stabilize the economy. Everything else is secondary. That's where it becomes even more difficult to deal with these reforms that are growth enhancing. I just wanted to finish with being a little bit more positive than one of the discussions on the growth prospects of the global economy, in the sense that clearly China is slowing down, but we see some sources of growth that we haven't seen in the past. One is technology, is AI, that is dominating. Second is growth through green transition. Climate is doing many bad things, but there is an area where we see a huge opportunity for the green transition. Thank you.
Thank you. Jinan?
Thank you, Dr. Mirza, and thank you to the speakers and panelists for these insightful presentations and discussion. So we received many questions from our virtual audience, and I think some of them have been already addressed during the discussion. But I will summarize this question focusing on two different areas. So the first set of questions is related to policies and reforms. So the first question is about conflict-affected countries like Yemen, which face immense challenges in meeting typical reform requirements from international financial institutions, while also managing debt burdens. So what are the creative solutions that give priority to stability and gradual progress over rigid reform prescription that you would suggest in order to help these countries like Yemen escape the trap of high debt and instability? It's a long question, but it's a very interesting one. So the second question is related to market-oriented reforms. As Chris mentioned earlier, we know that these reforms boost economic activities while preserving fiscal sustainability. So the question is why we don't see more countries implementing such reforms. We have another set of questions about debt structure. So the first one is about an optimal policy that would resolve the issue of domestic debt in the form of treasury bills. And there is also another question that is about the debt level in Egypt compared to Morocco. So while the external and internal debt ratios for these two countries are comparable, debt in Morocco deemed to be more sustainable than the one in Egypt. So why is that, and which reforms are recommended in the case of Egypt? Third question is about how can debt swap strategies be used to reduce the external debt level? And finally, what are your views about oil exporting countries that have considerable revenues but are still resorting to debt, and the debt service burden that this could lead to? These are the main areas of question. Thank you.
Thank you, Jinan. And the first question about, the reform and in the conflict environment and the debt. Adnan?
Look, the IMF does have a framework, and I'm speaking under the control of the current IMF staff. I am yesterday's news in that area. But I did have something to do with it, so I better admit my responsibilities. The IMF does have a framework for dealing with conflict countries. It does have a framework for dealing debt in those countries. The most recent examples are Somalia and Sudan. Okay? So the issue is being, to the best of the fund's ability, being addressed.
The issue, however, is not necessarily a matter of debt restructuring and debt forgiveness alone. Those are being done, for example, as I said, in programs for Sudan and Somalia. But the issue is conflicts have to be first made manageable, and then there has to be a government which can become the interlocutor of the international community and the implementer of reforms. For example, in like Yemen, that's not there. On Morocco and Egypt, very simple. Morocco has a much, much better policy framework. Morocco has the endorsement overall of its policy framework by the IMF. It has been receiving programs under a category which are usually for countries with good policies. Secondly, Morocco has very good access to international capital markets. For Egypt, a lot of money goes in, but hot money very quickly with the hope of getting out. The problems are, there are a few very structural problems about Egypt that, in my opinion, explain this. One is the huge role of the state and the role of the military and the cronyism that goes with that. Secondly, Egypt's continued reliance on geopolitical rents. Sometimes geopolitical rents are high, sometimes they're low. For some countries and for other countries not. For example, up to the Gaza war, Egypt's geopolitical rent was not high. The GCC countries, the international community, were not supporting Egypt very much. Egypt's program with the IMF was on hold for 2 years. But events outside the control of Egypt certainly led it to get more aid. The problem is when you delay reforms because you keep thinking you're too important to fail. Sometimes that is correct, sometimes it is not. One country whose geopolitical rents have gone down and they're still having a difficult time adjusting to it is Pakistan.
No, thank you, Adnan, for that. But also I need to add about the conflict environment, because most of the ODA money is going to the conflict environment. Honestly, it's not going to the growth model, it's not going into the development, it's going more into humanitarian aspect of the development, and that's what really not putting any engine of growth into the countries. John Lee, on the market originating reform, why you are not doing enough reform? We understand reform is very important. So tell us about it.
So let's see if I understand this question is why, if a market-oriented reform,
originated reform, it works. Why you are not doing enough of it? Why you are not doing enough of it?
I think it depends on each country's circumstances. But my most cynic observation is that status quo is always there's vested interest, benefit from the status quo. So market-oriented reforms, and you touch those vested interests. So that's why it's so difficult. One example is I see country after country is we mentioned energy pricing. They all understand need to increase electricity price or energy price, and to reduce the operating loss, or turn the state-owned utility company from operating loss, increase budgeted subsidy into profit, or at the least break even. Why delay? Because it has an impact not only on the group of vested interest people, either people live in the city or different segment of the population, but also have an impact on political stability. I don't know if my observation is right or not, but I think that's in part why it's so difficult. Once in a country in a crisis, then just have to do it. Greece was in sovereign debt crisis. Do you think the European Union have enough money to support Greece? Of course. But then, they cannot enforce the reform because it's so difficult. What do? They get the IMF as a third party. And IMF lend a tranche. And you do reform and they give you a tranche. You don't do reform, no next tranche. And what kind of reform we are talking about? Reduce pension. Any country you reduce pension, you are facing revolt. They topple government. They talk about it, reduce half of the public servants. Is that reduce public payroll? And here, again and again, we are not only to a narrow sense of government and all the public sector, including the state-owned enterprises. So I guess why it's so difficult. Maybe I want to, because the government mentioned good debt, bad debt. Actually, may I have 2 minutes to talk about this thing? Yeah. Because when you talk about the development and growth and the sustainability trade-off, there's an implicit assumption the government needs to spend more money, especially to public project, public investment. So as a creditor, we lend a lot. Actually, now so many countries, one after another, cannot pay. So we have a deep sort of reflection before we believe if we lend doing a project in the productive sector, produce revenue, produce foreign exchange, and that will support the country growth. And that would be sustainable. Not really. We learned the lesson. All these depend on at least 3 conditions. One is on a macro, the country's debt servicing capacity, repayment capacity, physical and foreign exchange has to grow as fast as its debt burden growth, if not faster. That's number one. Number 2, you have got to have a domestic good governance. That's very difficult. Corruption under control, and also favorable international environment. And now it's more difficult. You not have impact on geopolitical conflicts. And third is the project per se. The output, revenue, profit need to be as meet expectation, and that per se is not easy. Also, so I just want to say even good debt is difficult. So from hands on, we're doing all our lending. We're extremely careful.
And John Yi in Kuwait is saying that debts overall is bad, in our culture, before, but now it's become an addiction. So everybody is into it, So, Chris, can I go to you on the debt swap? Because one question is, how it's been used. And if, just quickly, because we are, on the time, and then Mahmoud on the oil, in the oil export countries, they're still accumulating debt. They are in the debt market, So what is it? Okay, Chris.
I can say a very few words on the reform. So I think it's a very well taken question, and I think Zhang Ye responded exactly right. It's difficult to do reforms, and you have to do it in times that are either good or there is political will. That's where we are in thinking about them. But what I can say is that when we look at the data, we have also discovered that there are waves of reform. In other words, during the 90s, there were a bunch of countries doing them at the same time. So seems to be some country learning by doing. So in other words, I'm thinking here some trade reforms or banking reforms or securities reform. So if we get to a point where a bunch of countries regionally are doing it, there is a lot of learning by doing. And this is something that unfortunately over the last decade, reforms were not done because things were shifted elsewhere. We think now there is, just like there is new interest in industrial policy, for example, there is a lot of interest in reform. But again, it's going to get very complicated quickly because the reforms will be done not as we have done them in the past for the whole economy. Countries will be doing reforms for sectors because that's how they see growth, being enhanced in the future, not the old-fashioned sort of macro policy. And of course, my last point is the one that I made before. The political economy of reform is something that has been studied, but mainly by political scientists that are not economists. It's only recently that we recognize this, and I think there is a lot of progress there. On debt swaps, we have been studying this for some time. Debt restructuring is very difficult, and it is in fact from that perspective that we are thinking of alternatives. I think, Adnan talked about this. Not easy job, right? And then are there any other options? That's where we are with the reforms. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a quick reaction on the political reform and difficulties. I think that each reform has its own losers and its own winners, and all the difficulty how to manage this opposition of interests when you are doing this reform. And when you have an institution well established, you cannot manage this rightly. But when your political economy and your stakeholders are not well managed, this is the difficult context, and this is what explains the failure of many reforms. As for the debt equity swap, we at the research division of the Arab Fund, you are working on this instrument as one of the options to design our debt relief agreements. This is an interesting channel in order to catalyze investment in renewable energy, in order to also incentivize the government in our region to make a huge investment in this direction. Finally, for the oil exporting countries accumulating resources, I think this is a very interesting source to diversify their economies. We are seeing Saudi Arabia, for example, how it is pushing in many interesting sectors in the green economy, in green transportation, in IT, and this was not possible if there was no room and no sufficient resources accumulated from the oil revenues. And this is an interesting.
Thank you. Marwan, last word.
I was, just, thinking about how we can manage, another problem, we're not talking about is, and is one of the perhaps most important we are facing in countries like us, is the brain drain. And I was thinking about technology because I think technology is very, very important, and we saw a lot of, our young researchers and part of these big firms in all over the world, from the Arab world. They are part of these very important firms. I saw a lot of talented and young and very, very smart Arab researchers in the US, in the UK, in a lot of places. I think that also should be part of, how we can better manage. You know very well that, and I know very well that you are very close to the Arab diaspora yourself, because you have done it for years before coming to to this even to the World Bank. I think it's perhaps the right time to do it. I know there's a lot of I think interest in countries like Arabia Saudi, Emirates, Kuwait, to bring back this intelligence. But I think it could be also part of how also you can bring the right people here and you can solve our problems. That's why I'm pushing on having more financial resources, having our regional institution, doing perhaps a very, very important bridge between MENA and Africa, because I think you need to think about our future. And that also could solve, the new phenomena of migration. I'm not talking about what is happening right now in Lebanon, but what is happening in Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, from the sub-Saharan countries. And I think all these, human resources could be used, in our region if we can put the right investment, and investment will bring growth, and we will, I think, decrease the level of the high debt. Without growth and without investment, without exports, you cannot do anything. That's, I think, my final words. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. And at the end, let me thank you all for really this informative and really interesting inputs, and what also colleagues presented to us in terms of the debt and the debt issues. That's going to stay with us for time. And definitely we need solutions, we need regional initiatives, we need a lot of collaboration between sovereign and private collaboration in order to address these issues. Paolo, let me thank you for organizing this event, IMF Center for Middle East, and to our panelists, Chris, Mahmoud, Adnan, and to our discussant Janggi and Marwan, and to you colleagues for your questions and intervention and to being here. Thank you very much and good night.
Thank you.